They thought I'd swallow pain the way a bird swallows stones, small, sharp, and silent, so it sinks into the gut and no one ever sees. And for most of my life, I did. I was 63 when I finally learned how to spit it back. But to understand that, you'd have to know the girl I used to be, the woman I was forced to become, and the storm that still lives in me now. I was born into hunger, not the kind you solve with a sandwich or a kind neighbor's casserole, but the kind that lingers in your bones, reshaping you. My father drank the little money we had, and my mother, God rest her, wore her silence like armor. She used to say, "Pain swallowed is peace kept." She believed that if she kept her voice soft, her body small, her eyes lowered, maybe the world would pass her by without harm. I believed her. I believed her so deeply that by the time I was 15, I had trained myself to nod when men spoke, to smile when they mocked, to laugh when they threatened. I could carry pain the way other girls carried ribbons in their hair, visible only to those who knew where to look. Then came Marcus. Marcus was the kind of man small towns mistake for a blessing. He wore clean shirts, drove a truck his daddy left him, and knew how to say ma'am with just enough honey to sound like respect. When he picked me, everyone said I was lucky. They said he'd lift me out of poverty, give me a home, protect me. And at first, I believed them. Isn't that the cruelest thing? To walk into your own cage smiling, thinking it's a castle. The cage revealed itself slowly. His protection became possession. His kindness curdled into suspicion. His hands, once steady and warm, grew heavy with anger. And I, trained by my mother's silence, swallowed it all. Every bruise, every insult, every humiliation at church picnics or Sunday dinners. I swallowed them whole, thinking maybe if I kept them down, they wouldn't poison me. But pain never stays swallowed. It festers, it leaks, and one day it spills. That day came when I was 32. Marcus had lost money again, gambling, though he'd never admit it, and came home snarling like a cornered dog. Our son, David, only 7 then, asked an innocent question about dinner. Marcus backhanded him so hard the child toppled into the wall. I heard the crack of plaster, saw my boy's little body crumple, and something inside me snapped. Not in the way you think. I didn't fight back, not then. I knelt beside David, pulled him into my arms, whispered promises I couldn't keep. And when Marcus demanded I stand, demanded I bow my head and apologize for raising a disrespectful brat, I did. I swallowed my own scream because I believed it was the only way to keep my son alive. But that scream didn't die. It planted itself inside me like a seed. And over the years, with every new wound, every betrayal, every humiliation, it grew. I became a garden of buried screams, each one waiting for its season. By the time I turned 50, Marcus had stripped me of almost everything, my family, my friends, even my reflection. I hardly recognized myself in the mirror anymore. My son had left the house at 18, vowing never to return. He couldn't stand to see me bowing, couldn't stand that I let Marcus rule my life. He called me weak, and in some ways he was right. But weakness can harden into something else if you give it long enough. Like clay baked in fire, I was changing without realizing it. And the final fire, the one that hardened me completely, came later when I lost not just my husband's love, not just my son's respect, but something far more precious. The night Marcus took from me the only thing I had left to cling to, my mother's ring. It wasn't worth much, not in money, but it was mine. It was the only proof I had that she'd existed, that her soft voice and bowed head had once walked this earth. He sold it for whiskey, didn't even tell me, just let me notice the empty box one morning as if it were nothing more than a missing sock. That morning, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even ask him why. I just looked at him, really looked, and thought, "You've mistaken my silence for surrender. You think I'll keep swallowing pain until it kills me. But you're wrong. It took me 63 years to learn the truth. Swallowed pain doesn't disappear. It becomes a weapon, and once you learn how to feed it back, it cuts sharper than any knife. And that, my dear, is when my real story began. Once the thought took root that I didn't have to keep swallowing, that I could feed it back, it was like carrying a hot coal inside me. Small, yes. Hidden, yes. But burning all the same. Marcus didn't notice, not at first. Men like him rarely do. They mistake silence for stupidity, obedience for loyalty. He strutted through the house as if he'd beaten me into dust, never realizing that the dust had teeth. I began in small ways. That's how it always starts. For years, I had rushed to meet his every demand, his shirts ironed, his meals hot, his boots by the door. So one morning, I didn't. The shirt stayed wrinkled. The potatoes were cold. His boots were left in the mud. When he shouted, I bowed my head, murmured an apology, but inside, I was laughing. Because I knew he felt it, not enough to name, not enough to strike harder, but enough that his world tilted a fraction, and he didn't know why. I started watching him more carefully, too. For decades I had avoided his eyes, afraid of what I'd see there. But now I studied him the way a hunter studies prey. His drinking, his gambling, the way his voice grew slick when women in town walked by. His weaknesses weren't secrets. I had simply never dared to notice them before. Now, they were all I saw. And here's the thing about men like Marcus. Their pride is louder than their common sense. He thought he was feared, but the truth, folks in town laughed at him behind his back. The men he gambled with whispered about how he never paid his debts. The women rolled their eyes at his cheap charm. Even the preacher avoided his handshake, knowing it carried the stink of sin. He didn't see it, but I did, and I tucked it all away like twigs for a fire. The first real test came one Saturday night. He stumbled home, reeking of beer and tobacco, threw his jacket on the floor, and demanded I bring him his supper. I placed the plate in front of him and watched him eat. Watched the grease run down his chin, the crumbs scatter across the table, the way he chewed with his mouth open like a hog. Something in me shifted then. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt disgust. "Salt!" he barked, slamming his fist on the table. "You didn't put enough salt." I stood there, wooden spoon in my hand, and let the silence stretch. Usually I would have leapt to fix it, to avoid the storm, but not that night. "You hearing me, woman?" he snapped. I met his eyes, slowly, deliberately. My voice came out quiet but steady. "Eat it as it is." The room went still. He froze mid-bite, his face red with shock. For a moment, I thought he'd strike me. But he didn't. He only stared wide-eyed as though I'd sprouted horns. And then he laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. "Getting brave, are you?" "You'll regret it." He pushed the plate away, stomped outside, and slammed the door. I stood in that kitchen, trembling, spoon still in hand, not from fear, but from the thrill of it. I had fed him the first morsel of my pain, small but bitter, and he choked on it. From then on, I played a dangerous game. I made sure his shirts had loose stitches. Let his friends see the holes in his socks. Let the preacher hear my sighs when Marcus bragged too loudly at church socials. Little cracks, tiny humiliations, nothing so bold he could prove, but enough to gnaw at his pride. It was a slow poison, and I savored every drop. But feeding pain back isn't just about revenge. It's about learning to stand in your own skin again. One afternoon, I walked to town alone. For years, I hadn't dared go without him. He liked to keep me on a short leash, dragging me at his side so folks could see I belonged to him. But that day, I walked down Main Street with my head higher than it had been in decades. People noticed. Mrs. Callahan, who'd once whispered behind her hand about my bruises, looked startled. The grocer tipped his hat without smirking. Even the preacher paused, eyes softening just slightly. It was as if they'd all forgotten I existed outside Marcus's shadow, and now here I was, reminding them. It gave me a strange sort of power, one I'd never tasted. And I realized feeding pain back wasn't only for him. It was for the world that had watched me bow and said nothing. Still, the danger grew. Marcus wasn't blind. He saw the shift in me, even if he couldn't name it. One night, after losing badly at cards, he stumbled in, face flushed with rage. "They think they can laugh at me," he slurred. "You did this. You made me weak." He shoved me hard against the wall. My shoulder cracked, pain shooting down my arm. The old me would have bowed, begged, promised to do better. But instead, I looked him dead in the eye and whispered, "Weakness was yours long before I was." His hand froze mid-air. He didn't strike. Not that time. He stormed out instead, muttering curses, leaving me bruised but standing. And I knew then I had crossed a line I could never uncross. He would come for me harder now. I could feel it, like thunder rumbling on the horizon. But I was no longer the girl who swallowed storms whole. I was the woman who had learned how to send the lightning back And soon Marcus would learn what it meant to choke on every ounce of pain he had forced down my throat, because I had only just begun to feed it back. The thing about feeding pain back is that it doesn't always land where you aim it. Sometimes it spills, staining everyone nearby. After that night, the shove against the wall, the words I spoke that should have earned me a broken jaw, Marcus grew restless, more suspicious. He began sniffing at my silence the way a hound sniffs at smoke. He didn't understand it, but he felt it, a shift he couldn't control. And men like Marcus fear nothing more than losing control. So he began circling me tighter. He followed me into town, hovering near the market stall, as if daring me to speak too freely. He demanded I account for every coin, every hour, every step I took outside the house. He even accused me of plotting with the preacher, as if my bent head at Sunday service was some kind of secret signal. At first I thought I'd pushed too far too soon. Fear returned, creeping cold along my spine. Maybe he would crush me after all, and I would die, another nameless woman swallowed by her husband's rage. But then something happened that neither of us expected. David came back. I hadn't seen my boy in nearly 15 years. He'd left at 18 with nothing but a backpack and a fire in his eyes, swearing he'd never return to a house where silence was survival. He'd written once or twice in the early years, short letters full of anger and shame, but those stopped long ago. I thought I'd lost him forever. And then, one autumn morning, I looked up from hanging laundry and saw him walking down the dirt road. Taller now, broader in the shoulders, but the same jaw, the same storm in his gaze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands clutched the wet sheets like they were ropes keeping me upright. "David," I whispered. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes hard. "Mama." We stared at each other, the silence between us thicker than all the words we'd never spoken. Then the door banged open. Marcus. "Well, well," he drawled, smirking. "The prodigal son returns." David's jaw tightened. He didn't answer, but I saw his fists clench. Marcus chuckled, ugly and mean. "What's the matter, boy? Still mad your mama never taught you how to be a man?" The words stung, but not for me. They stung because I saw my son flinch, saw him swallow his own pain the way I had taught him, even without meaning to. That's when it hit me. The poison wasn't just mine. I had passed it on. My silence had fed my son's hunger, his anger, his shame. And in that moment, I made a vow. I would not let him swallow another drop. Dinner that night was a battlefield. Marcus poured whiskey, baiting David with every word. David sat stiff, biting his tongue, his eyes flicking toward me as though waiting for me to bow. But I didn't. When Marcus demanded more bread, I set the plate down with a calmness that made his smirk falter. When he mocked David for running off like a scared pup, I met my son's eyes and shook my head, slow, deliberate, telling him, without words, "Don't swallow it, not anymore." And for the first time in my life, I watched my boy push back from the table, stand tall, and walk out without a word, not bowed, not broken, just done. Marcus sputtered, furious, but I only sat there, spoon in hand, a strange calm settling over me. The next morning, David came to me while Marcus was still snoring. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but his eyes softer now. "Why are you still here, Mama?" he asked. His voice was low, almost pleading. I looked at him, at the man my silence had shaped, and I wanted to fall to my knees and beg forgiveness. But instead, I told him the truth. "Because I've been waiting," I said, "waiting for the right moment to stop swallowing and start spitting it back." He frowned. "That moment ain't ever gonna come, not while he's alive." "Then maybe," I whispered, "it's time I make it come." His eyes widened. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd stop me. But then he nodded, slow and grim, as though he'd seen the same fire in himself. We didn't speak of it again. But from that day on, I felt him watching me, the way I'd begun watching Marcus. And for the first time, I wasn't alone in the waiting. Marcus noticed too. He wasn't a fool, not entirely. He saw the glances, felt the shift, and he grew crueler for it. One evening, drunk and mean, he slammed his glass on the table and snarled, "You think you can turn my own blood against me, woman? You think you can spit in my face and I won't spit harder?" I looked at him slow and steady and said, "Spit all you want. I've swallowed worse." The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. He didn't laugh. He didn't shout. He just stared, his face red, his hands trembling. And in that silence, I realized something. The coal I'd carried all those years had grown into a fire. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was in David, too. And fire, once it spreads, doesn't bow to anyone. The days after David's return felt like walking on a tightrope stretched over fire. Every step, every breath, I knew the rope could snap, and when it did, one of us would burn. Marcus grew paranoid. He could sense something shifting but couldn't name it, and that made him dangerous. He'd mutter under his breath about betrayal, about conspiracies, about how even his own family wanted him brought low. His drinking worsened, his gambling debts piled higher, and every night he came home with more venom dripping from his tongue. But for all his bluster, I saw the cracks. He wasn't the unshakable tyrant anymore. He was a man rotting from the inside, too proud to admit he was hollow. And I, finally, was steady enough to see it. David and I spoke in fragments. A glance across the table, a half-whispered word in the garden, a silence we both understood. He didn't ask me how, and I didn't tell him when. But he knew, the way a soldier knows the drumbeat of war. The first real blow came from outside. One evening, a man named Carver showed up at our door, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who smelled like tobacco and menace. He leaned against the porch rail and tipped his hat with a grin that held no warmth. "Evening, missus," he said, voice low and slick. "Your husband owes me, owes more than he can pay, and folks round here are saying he's running out of luck." Marcus staggered to the door, half drunk already, and puffed up like a rooster. "I'll pay you when I damn well please," he barked. Carver's smile widened. "No, sir. You'll pay me now, or I'll take my payment another way." His eyes slid past Marcus toward me. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I didn't flinch, not anymore. I met his gaze, steady as stone, and for a second I saw surprise flicker there. Marcus sputtered curses, drove him off with threats he couldn't back up. But when the door slammed and his footsteps faded, I knew the truth. Carver would be back, and next time he wouldn't come just to talk. That night, as Marcus ranted about worthless thieves and jealous bastards, I sat silent, my mind sharper than it had ever been. For decades I had lived in reaction, dodging blows, swallowing shame, patching wounds. But now I was thinking ahead, planning, because pain doesn't just wound, it teaches. And mine had taught me patience, sharper than any knife. The turning point came 2 nights later. Marcus came home later than usual, reeking of gin and smoke. His face was pale, his hands shaking. I knew before he said a word, he'd lost something big. The deed, he slurred, our land. I put it up to buy myself back in the game, and I'll win it back, don't you worry. My stomach dropped. That land wasn't just dirt. It was my father's sweat, my mother's prayers, my childhood scraped into soil. It was the only inheritance left for David, for any grandchild I might one day hold. And Marcus had thrown it away like loose change. I looked at him then, really looked, and felt something in me calcify. He wasn't just cruel. He wasn't just weak. He was a thief who had stolen not just my body, not just my years, but the very ground beneath my feet. And I decided he would pay, not with blood, not yet, but with fear. The next morning, I walked into town, not skulking, not with my head bowed. I walked straight to Carver's usual corner outside the saloon. He tipped his hat again, smug as a cat. "Missus," he drawled, "come to pay your husband's debt?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "I came to tell you he's hiding money, buried it, says no one will ever find it." His eyes lit up like a starving man spotting meat. "Is that so?" "It is," I said, lowering my gaze just enough to sell the lie. "But you didn't hear it from me." And then I walked away, my heart pounding, my hands trembling, but my back straight. That night, Marcus stormed through the door, eyes wild. "What lies have you been spreading?" he shouted, striking the wall so hard the lamp shook. I bowed my head, just enough to keep him guessing, and murmured, "Only the truth, husband." His fist clenched. He raised it, then stopped, because in my eyes he saw something he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not submission, something else, and it rattled him. He backed away, muttering curses, pacing like a caged beast. And I knew then the trap was set. Carver would come hunting for treasure that didn't exist. Marcus would rage, deny, dig his own grave deeper with every breath. And I, quiet, watchful, steady, would feed the pain back, one bitter spoonful at a time. The storm had been brewing for decades. Now it was finally rolling in, and this time I wasn't the one swallowing it. You can always tell when a lie has taken root, because it grows faster than the truth ever could. Within a week, Carver's boots were trampling our dirt road nearly every day. He circled the house like a buzzard, eyes sharp, questions sharper. Where had Marcus buried it? How much was there? Was I the only one who knew? I played my part well, bowed my head just so, spoke soft, let my eyes flick nervously toward the ground as if I carried secrets I shouldn't. That was all it took. Greed did the rest. Marcus, drunk and blustering, swore he had nothing to hide. But Carver didn't believe him. And worse, Marcus didn't believe me. He stormed through the house like a rabid dog, turning over floorboards, tearing through cupboards, slapping me across the cheek when I swore I'd said nothing. But for once, the sting of his hand didn't make me smaller. It made me stronger, because I knew, with each desperate shout, with each blow, the noose around his neck was tightening, and I was the one pulling it. David saw it too. Late one night he came to me in the kitchen, his face lit by the faint glow of the dying stove. "Mama," he whispered, "you're playing with fire." "I know," I said. "He'll kill you if he finds out." I looked at my son, my boy, who had grown into a man despite the poison he'd swallowed, and I said the words I never thought I'd be brave enough to speak. "Then let him try. I'm done dying in silence." David didn't answer, but his jaw tightened, and I knew he was with me, whether he could say it or not. The breaking point came sooner than I'd imagined. Carver didn't come alone one night. He brought 2 men, hard-eyed, carrying ropes and knives. They cornered Marcus in the yard while I stood at the window, hands folded, the same way I used to when I begged God to make it stop. But I wasn't praying anymore. I was watching. Their voices rose, Carver accusing, Marcus denying, fists shaking. And then Marcus, too drunk to keep his tongue, shouted, "You'll never find it! You'll never take what's mine!" That was all Carver needed. He and his men tore through the house, overturning furniture, splintering walls, smashing the lamp my mama had given me. They even ripped open the floorboards, hunting treasure that wasn't there. Marcus bellowed, bloodied and desperate. But me? I sat on the porch steps, quiet, calm, a faint smile tucked in my chest where no one could see, because the first cut had landed and I hadn't lifted a finger. When it was over, they left Marcus half broken in the dirt, ribs likely cracked, lips split wide. He spat blood into the dust and cursed the whole world. For a fleeting moment, I thought, now is the time. I could have ended him right there with a stone, a rope, even my bare hands. But no, death would have been mercy. I wanted him to kneel, so I helped him inside, cleaned his wounds, fed him broth, played the dutiful wife once again, and he believed it. That was the cruelest part. He believed it. But the real twist hadn't come yet. It came 3 weeks later on a cold afternoon when a knock rattled the door. I opened it and froze. Ruthie, my daughter, my pride and my shame. The one who had left years ago, spitting in my face, swearing she'd never live under the same roof as me again. And now she stood on my porch, belly swollen with child, eyes hollow with desperation. "Mama," she whispered, voice breaking, "I can't do this alone. He promised if I came back, he'd take care of me." And my world tilted. He, not me, him, Marcus, my daughter had come back not for her mother, not for the woman who had birthed her, fed her, swallowed pain for her. She had come back for him, the man who had broken us both. I should have screamed. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I bowed my head, stepped aside, and let her in. Because if she wanted to tether herself to his sinking ship, then she would drown with him. That night, I watched them talk in the lamplight. Marcus, still battered, spinning promises sweeter than honey. Ruthie, tears streaking her cheeks, nodding, clinging to hope like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. And I realized then she hadn't escaped the curse. She had only found a different way to wear it. My heart cracked, but I did not break, not anymore, because I understood. If she stood with him, she stood against me. And that was the moment I ceased being only a wife plotting revenge. That was the night I became a strategist. Marcus thought he had regained his throne. Ruthie thought she had found a savior. But both of them were walking straight into the trap I had been weaving with every breath. And soon they would learn. Pain doesn't disappear when you force it down someone's throat. It comes back sharper, stronger, hungrier, and I was ready to serve the feast. There's a certain silence before a storm, heavy, pressing, as if the air itself is holding its breath. That was the air in my house the days before everything came undone. Marcus limped through the rooms like a wounded animal, nursing his pride more than his broken ribs. Ruthie shadowed him, clinging to his every word, her belly round and restless with the life inside her. And me, I moved in quiet circles, patient as ever, tending fires they didn't see. I had waited decades. I could wait a few days more, but fate has its own timing. It happened the night Carver returned, not with questions this time, but with hunger in his eyes. He came on horseback, 2 men at his side, rain glistening on his coat. "Your husband's out of time, missus," he said, tipping his hat without a smile. "If he won't pay, I'll take payment another way." And his gaze slid to Ruthie, to her belly. My blood froze, the air shifted. For a heartbeat, even Marcus looked rattled. "You'll not touch what's mine," he roared, lunging forward. Carver's men caught him easily, drove him to his knees in the dirt. And in that moment, something inside me clicked into place. There it was, the sight I'd carried in my mind all these years, him on his knees, not in prayer, not in drunken stupor, but broken, pleading, small, and I knew this was the moment. I stepped forward, voice steady as a blade. "There's no money, Mr. Carver, there never was, and he's been feeding you lies, the same way he's fed them to everyone else." Carver's eyes narrowed. "And who fed me the tale of buried treasure then?" I lifted my chin. I did. For the first time in my life, I didn't bow. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's head snapped toward me, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You," he spat, "you filthy, treacherous—" But the rest died on his tongue, because I was no longer the wife who swallowed his words. I was the storm he never saw coming. Carver laughed low, ugly. "Well, well, the quiet wife's got teeth after all." He gestured to his men. "Take her." But I was ready. My hand slipped into my apron pocket and closed around the hammer I'd carried for weeks. I swung it fast, hard, catching the nearest man across the skull. He dropped like a sack of flour. The second lunged, but Ruthie, God I'd help her, snatched the lantern from the shelf and hurled it. Glass shattered, oil spilled, fire bloomed, flames licked up the walls, hungry and wild. The room erupted in chaos. Carver cursed, stumbling back. His man dragged him out. Ruthie screamed. Marcus crawled toward the door, hacking smoke, eyes wide with fear. And I stood still, watching him, on his knees, coughing, begging. "Help me, woman," he rasped. For God's sake. For decades, I had saved him, stitched his shirts, patched his pride, swallowed his rage. But now the fire was mine. I leaned down close enough for him to see the years etched into my face. "They thought I'd swallow pain forever," I whispered, "but I learned how to feed it back." He reached for me. I stepped back. Ruthie grabbed my arm. "Mama, we have to go." I looked at her, my daughter, who had hated me, who had clung to him, who had finally seen him as he was. I looked at her belly, the child who might yet grow up free of our curse. "Yes," I said, "we do." And together we walked out into the night as the house roared behind us. The fire ate everything, his debts, his lies, his throne of cruelty. By dawn, nothing was left but ash. The town whispered, of course. Some said Carver had set the fire. Others claimed it was God's judgment. A few whispered that maybe, just maybe, I had struck the match myself. And I let them wonder. I let them see me walk through the market with my head high, my back unbent. Let them whisper my name with fear, with respect, because whispers can be weapons too. Ruthie gave birth not long after, a daughter red-faced and fierce, fists clenched as though ready to fight the world. When I held her, I felt sorrow and hope braided together, sorrow for all I had endured, hope that she would never bow as I had. I will teach her what my mother never taught me, that pain is not to be swallowed, but to be forged into fire, into steel, into a weapon. Now, when I sit on the porch and the sun sets low, folks see only a widow, a grandmother, a relic of hard times. They don't see the hammer hidden in the shed, the scars under my sleeves, the fire that still flickers behind my eyes. But I know who I am. I'm the woman who swallowed storms until they became mine. I am the mother who was betrayed, and the wife who made a tyrant kneel. I am the silence that broke, the pain that burned, the storm that fed it back. And that is how my story ends. Not bowed, not broken, not begging, but standing with the fire at my back and the world finally on its knees.